Hey USA, it's just me, and as you know, I'm nobody, just an American, and this is just an American moment. This is the podcast where we ask the questions the mainstream media won't ask, and we provide the answers and solutions that the political class either can't or won't. So, welcome to the podcast. Just like you, summertime, and so I missed the last 2 weeks in terms of doing this podcast, but it is vacation time, and you do those kind of things. Anyhow, I want to take a moment today to thank those of you who do view into the podcast. I hope you gain some value from it. And more importantly, I'd like to thank those people who have purchased my book. You know, it was never in my intent to make a lot of money, to become famous, or anything else from doing this. The reality is that'll never happen. And quite honestly, at my age, I don't care. What I do care about is that everyday Americans take back our country. And this is my way of attempting to do that. If I reach a couple of dozen people out there and I can help persuade them to understand the importance of being engaged and supporting our country, I'm going to do that. Unfortunately, this nation has been handed over to a group of people, the political class, who now seem to believe that they're entitled to remain in government forever. They have lost sight of what their role is and that they work for us. That being elected means that they are there to do the will of the people, not to do what's best for them. But clearly, they have forgotten that. Clearly, they have served too long. I mean, look, folks, I'm a baby boomer. I know things are out of control in this country when people from my parents' generation, have been serving there since I was in my 20s. Not only that, some of the same people serving there have been serving there since before my adult children were born. That's crazy. You take Pelosi, you take Feinstein, you take Biden, many other Democrats, also many Republicans. They're all the reasons that we're still hearing the kinds of arguments and the kinds of battles that I was hearing about in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, in my 50s, and in my 60s. You got to ask yourself, why aren't things changing? Why? Because America, you keep electing the same morons who still have the same arguments with each other. You got one group that looks out for their own self interest, and the other group who thinks the party reigns supreme. Either way, it's a losing proposition and it's become absurd. We now have a situation which really drives me crazy and shows you how these people have been around too long. You've got the President of the United States bringing up Jim Crow and the Civil War. Jim Crow and the Civil War. Are you kidding me? Of course, looking at the president, he may have been serving in some capacity during the Civil War. I'm just not sure what side he was on. If you're one of those people who truly believe that we've returned to Jim Crow, and by the way, my guess is most people under 50 have no clue what Jim Crow is all about. But if you're one of those people out there who really believe we've seen a return to Jim Crow and that this is the greatest crisis since the Civil War because we asked for voter ID, well, folks, all I can say to you is one thing. Check yourself into the closest psychiatric ward because you are nuts. You are crazy. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point because I discussed this quite a bit in my last podcast, but it's getting really nuts. And don't give me this Jim Crow 2.0 crap either. I have one question, people. Is our country better off today than it was 1 year ago? Anyone without a brain knows the answer to that question. They know we were better off 1 year ago because 1 year ago, outside of COVID, we were on the right course as a nation. There were no border issues. We didn't see people flocking across the border unchecked, you know, no details, carrying COVID. We didn't see any of that 1 year ago. Now we're flying them all over the country, embedding them in our society. That's crazy. 1 year ago, we didn't have a Cuban issue. There was no issue. But I can tell you one thing, the administration a year ago would have reacted a lot more positively to addressing the Cuban issue. Nor did we have an Iranian issue because no one was talking about re-engaging in nuclear arms talks with the Iranians, who's a nation who has lied through their teeth ever since the days the Ayatollah took power. So get into that. And we're now back again. We're back. The president says we're back again. We're back to kowtowing to the European powers, to China, to all the weak nations of the world. We're now kowtowing. America's back. If you believe that, you truly do need to check into that psychiatric ward. You know, we didn't have self-hatred of our country a year ago. We thought our country was the greatest nation and American exceptionalism was the greatest. And one would think that when we see independent businesses launching rockets into space, that would be indicative of it. But unfortunately, it's not. So now, a little bit of a follow-up to my last podcast. For those who didn't listen to last week's podcast, let me be clear. We have one national anthem in this country. The NFL is out of their freaking mind. And anyone who believes, the NFL or anyone else who believes that we have to have two or more national anthems, well, let me recommend this. Why don't you find that second country to sing that national anthem in? Because it ain't part of our country. We are all Americans. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. You don't seek to diversify, you seek to divide. And what the NFL did is nothing but stupid. Now, if I seem perturbed this week, I am. Because you know what? I'm tired of a media that tells half-truths, which are commonly known as lies. I'm tired of people covering up for a bumbling fool in the White House. Having lived through the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, I'm tired of the whiners out there who keep going, it's not fair. It's not fair. Guess what? Your grandparents fought and won to assure that it's fair. So you bunch of lazy, whining, sniveling children, cut the crap. To those saying that Black Lives Matter, I say, you didn't come up with that. We came up with that. My generation came up with that. Your grandparents came up with that. Because you know what we believe in the 1960s? We fought hard to make sure all lives matter. All lives. So don't take us back 50, 60 years. Because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. This is America. E pluribus unum. All lives matter. Now, to those praising the Cuban regime, what kind of morons are you? You clearly have no idea what you're talking about. I've lived and I've worked in communist countries. So until you've done the same, don't give me your sniveling crap about how good socialism is and how good communism is. You know, even Bernie Sanders, the so-called socialist, with his 3 houses, one a lakefront property. Come on, that's socialism? I don't think so. These people are in it for themselves to get what they can. And you know what? If you follow socialist countries and communist countries and live in them like I did, you see there is an elite class. They typically center around the political base. And they tell the people how the party's going to do everything for them. But in reality is they do for themselves. Well, gee, what party in the United States does that? You know, I just can't stand this idealistic bullshit. And that's what we're hearing these days. And most of the country can't stand this idealistic bullshit. I have seen firsthand the aftermath of China's Cultural Revolution. I have seen the pitfalls and despair of communism and socialism. So I don't need any little punk asses in our government. And you know who you are, the AOCs, the Ilhan Omars. I don't need to listen to your lying mouths spew how great communism, socialism is, because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And another area of the world, South Africa. Why isn't our media covering the barbarianism that's taking place in South Africa? Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. Why doesn't the media explain it more? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. We don't get the truth from them. And you know why? Because, to quote Jack Nicholson, they can't handle the truth. They would rather spew their lies. You know, most of them wouldn't know the truth if it kicked them in the ass. Yeah. And another area that I'm really grumped about this week. I am so sick of these pussy CEOs who cave into every special interest group and politicize their companies. You know, I've served as a CEO of both public and private companies. And I would never, ever put my employees, my shareholders, or my investors in the middle of a political debate. I would not manage my company based on my customers' politics or my customers' employees' politics or who are the heads of those companies independently donated to. That is so counterproductive and so ignorant. Yes, you're ignorant. Zuckerberg, all of you guys, you're ignorant. You have no idea what you're doing. The ignorance of these CEOs should get them all terminated. The hubris of believing that you have more power as a corporation than our Constitution and of the American people is an insult to all Americans. Last but not least, I'm tired of the COVID information. In my book, I have a whole chapter on COVID-19, written from the perspective of somebody who lived in China during SARS. Read it. You might learn something. I'm sick of it. You know, I saw firsthand the right way to handle a pandemic and the wrong way to handle a pandemic. And what I'm seeing in this country is unbelievable. Unbelievable. We have a self-anointed political class in this country who has totally screwed things up and put this country through unnecessary hell. And they're still doing it. We got to stop them because they're out of control. And the place to do that is at the ballot box. You know, I mentioned in my book, in the chapter on COVID, I talked about the fact that just before COVID began, I reread, I should say, Camus' The Plague. And if you haven't read it, you really should. See if you can find which character resembles somebody in today's dialogue about COVID. I can tell you one thing. One that jumped out at me the second I reread it, and this was early on in COVID, was the character of Cotard, who is basically Fauci. And I'm not going to get into the novel itself, you can read that. It's an easy novel to read, but you'd learn something from it. And you learn a lot about handling a pandemic. But you got to educate yourself, America. You got to educate yourself. You know, it was John Kennedy who said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Oh my God, today, if Kennedy was around and he made a comment like that, he'd be considered an outcast. There's not a soul in the Democrat Party nor the Republican Party willing to stand up and say that. Instead, what we have now is a useful idiot in the White House who calls being patriot wearing a mask. I can tell you this man has no idea what being a patriot is. This crap about it's your patriotic duty to wear a mask. Are you kidding me? Unbelievable. Well, I vented for the week, folks. I feel a little bit better. Probably didn't make you feel better, but I really ask that you think about what I said. You also think about getting my book. I appreciate it. Every book that's sold, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's not perfect, but then I'm nobody, just an American. So I'd like to leave you with a quote for the week. And this quote comes from my earlier business book, Dodging Bullets, Shooting Back, Surviving on the Corporate Battlefield. And I've got to thank Pastor Rick Warren for this quote. And it is, a clear purpose not only defines what we do, it defines what we don't do. Thanks for listening. See you next time.